have some really exciting things to share.
Hey everybody. I'm Raven from Newfoundland, and I'm here in a humanitarian capacity. So I am about to release a message to local police office and enforcement here in Ottawa. Right now, you have it within you, in your own discretion, to change the future of the entire world. Every one of you as individuals and individual capacity as a human being cannot deny how proud you are of these people that stand here in Parliament, because these are your people. You are so much more than the uniforms you wear. You are fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, brothers, and sisters to us all. Are you going to be able to live with yourself if you choose to follow the dictates of a corrupt and criminal, unlawful government who has displayed no respect for law, humanity, or life itself? Or are you going to be the heroes that we believe you really are? Are you going to take a chance on us and allow us, your people, the opportunity to serve and protect the freedoms of your family and your children's families? It is the love of our great nation that has brought us here, and together we stand in the face of unbelievable adversary. With great courage and standing strong, we will peacefully, in unity, through courage, love, overcome these challenges presented by a tyrannical government that has created consistent divide. I am one Canadian amongst an entire world that can evolve into unified together as one, restoring democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Please, for the love of God, for the love of each other, and for the love of our children, stand with us. This is our message to the law enforcement that's present here in Ottawa. We are appealing to you now because every day there are new challenges that we face, and every day our movement grows and we unify. So we are officially asking the law enforcement and every police presence in Ottawa to stand with the people, because we are here standing for you. Thank you for your time.
Amen.
Thank you. Hand.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Hillier. I'm the independent member of the provincial legislature representing the riding of Lanark, Frontenac, and Kingston. And thank you for joining us today on this very somber and overcast day in our nation's capital. I'm just going to, this press conference, we're going to have a number of people which I'll introduce. I would ask everybody that to hold your questions until all the presentations are complete. Each of the four individuals who will be speaking today will have some brief comments, maybe about 5 minutes in length, and then followed by a robust and healthy and important exchange of questions and answers. Joining with me today is Bruce Pardy. He has been a lawyer and law professor for 30 years and serves as executive director of RightsPro, a Toronto-based think tank. We also have David Amber, is a criminal lawyer and member of the bar of Quebec and Ontario with over 12 years of experience, and has, I want to say, been prolific in defending freedom and people who have faced charges under the Reopening Act in the last 2 years. And he is also joined today with his colleague and associate Matthew Wolfson. We also have Cecil Lyon. He has practiced law here in the city of Ottawa for over 35 years. He is known for the practice of dispute resolution. And last but not least, we have Sandy, a trucker from Alberta, who has been here since day one, who has traveled many thousands of miles to come to the nation's capital, along with his family and his children. And he, in my view, personifies the freedom movement, the Truckers Convoy, and so many others like Sandy who are here. So just a brief comment before we get underway. The Emergency Act that is being invoked, in my view, demonstrates the gravity and just how dark the situation has become for our country. Never before in Canada's history have we authorized the use of force and violence to resolve a public policy dispute. Never. Right? And that's what this Freedom Convoy is about, is a dispute and a difference on public policy on COVID mandates. We have invoked the authorities of the Emergency Act on only 3 occasions in our history: during the First World War, the Second World War, and during the FLQ crisis. In each of those cases, it was not just a threat, it was indeed committed acts of violence and an external or internal threat to our country. It wasn't a threat, it was actual actions that were being undertaken. But it was not about a dispute of public policy between the citizens of Canada and our government. The Truckers Convoy, as I've described in the past, not only has delivered hope across the country to Ottawa, delivered hope to our country, it has delivered hope to the world. Justin Trudeau's invoking of the War Measures Act, or the Emergency Act, is an attempt to extinguish this glimmer of hope in this long, dark tunnel of the last 2 years. And I will say this: 2 years ago, our governments took the most heavy-handed, the most extreme approach to deal with an uncertain time, without cause or care of the consequences of those extreme measures. We instituted lockdowns against an entire society over a respiratory virus. We knew there was going to be harm and consequences from those actions, but our governments did them anyway. And we all know the significant increase in mortality by people who were never at risk of COVID. That's what we did 2 years ago. We swung the very blunt hammer at a small fly. We missed the fly and we caused substantial collateral damage. Justin Trudeau is attempting to swing a very blunt sledgehammer again at a fly of protest on Wellington Street. He will miss that fly once again. The consequences and the collateral damage of his actions will be felt by all Canadians for a long, long time. And I'll end off with this. I'll ask all Canadians, whether they be in Parliament or whether they be on the streets of Ottawa, all Canadians, whether they view themselves as bystanders and spectators to this defining moment in Canadian history, or Canadians who are being asked to implement the enforcement and authorities of the Emergency Act. Do we as Canadians resolve our differences through force and use of force and violence, or do we resolve our differences through peaceful, civil means? That is the question that is put before Canadians today. Our history has been one of peaceful civil discourse and to resolve differences in considered, thoughtful manners. Our Prime Minister is asking us to to discard our history, and to embrace forceful, violent means to resolve our differences. With that, I would like to ask Professor Bruce Pardy to come to the podium.
So, when it comes to the Emergencies Act, the emperor has no clothes, is the message I would like to deliver to you. You may have seen or read legal commentators say that the invocation of the Emergencies Act has not been proper, is not valid, the requirements have not been met, and they are correct. And I want just briefly to explain why that is. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I think it's important that we all understand what they're saying and why. So, I want to start with the Emergencies Act itself. It is, as you probably know, a federal statute, an ordinary federal statute that already existed, has existed since 1988. It provides the framework for a government to invoke as long as the requirements in the statute are met. And if those requirements are not met, then nothing else works, nothing else is valid. In other words, the government cannot act in this way unless it has statutory authority. Right? So that's the first point. Second point is this. The Emergencies Act provides for 4 different kinds of emergencies: public welfare, public order, international, and war. Now, on this occasion, if you look at the proclamation, the declaration that the government has brought forward, they have chosen a public order emergency. So the other 3 are now out. We're talking about a public order emergency as defined in the Act. So, let's look at the definition. And the words, as is always the case when you're dealing with law, the words matter. The words matter. They define the line between lawful and unlawful. So here's the definition of a public order emergency. It means an emergency that arises from threats to the security of Canada that is so serious as to be a national emergency. Okay. Now, as is so often the case in statutes, you have definitions that have terms that are themselves defined. So one of the requirements of meeting this threshold for a public order emergency is to have a national emergency. What does national emergency mean in the statute? It means this. It means an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that is either A or B. And here's A, and I'll tell you B. A is this. A, it seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with. That's A. B is seriously threatens the ability of the government to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. Now those are the 2 choices. It's got to be A or B. And in this case, I'll get to in a minute, the government has chosen A. So forget B. And the final bit of that definition is, and that cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. Okay, so we're racking up requirements here. What do we have so far? Number 1, in order to be validly invoked, there has to be a public order emergency that, number 1, threatens the security of Canada. Number 2, seriously endangers the lives, health, and safety of Canadians. Number 3, exceeds the capacity or authority of a province to deal with. And number 4, is not able to be effectively dealt with under any existing laws. If you do not meet all those 4 things, you have not met the threshold of a public order emergency. Now, that's the statute. That's the statute that has existed since 1988. Now we get into what the Trudeau government has actually done. The first thing they did is proclaim, invoke, declare that they were using the Act. And in that proclamation, they have identified, as they are required to do, the emergency they are acting on. How do they describe it? Well, in several parts, but here's the key one. The emergency is activities that are directed toward or in support of threat or use of acts of serious violence. The emergency is serious violence. That's what the government has said, for the purpose of achieving a political or ideological objective. That's the basis for the regulations that they have now made. One providing for emergency measures on the ground, and one providing for economic measures, like freezing your bank accounts. So the question is this: is that a valid invocation of the Act? Well, just this morning, in response to a reporter, the Minister of Public Safety was asked what the basis was, whether or not they had intelligence about the violence or the weapons. Because after all, keep this in mind, there has not been any violence in Ottawa from the convoy. There has been no violence. And so there must be some kind of evidence that indicates that there's going to be violence, there's going to be a threat of violence, because here again are the words. The words are, in the proclamation, the threat or use of acts of serious violence. In response to the question from the reporter, the minister said that there was no intelligence of the existence or presence of weapons in downtown Ottawa. And in fact, what he said instead was that the basis for the government's actions was rhetoric. Rhetoric. It was speech. It was the expression of an ideological position. Now, just for a moment, consider the implications. This is a government that has invoked an emergency statute on its own admission on the basis of something that somebody has said. They have no actual violence occurring. They have no intelligence about threats of violence occurring. I'm sure you can work out what the consequences are if this is to be considered a proper use of the Emergencies Act. Now, let's just take a bigger picture just for a moment. I don't want to get too far into this, and I don't want to take up too much time. But just for a moment, consider this. The ideology that is now in place in our political realm is one in which language is being redefined. There's all kinds of terms that don't mean what they used to mean. Racism, for example. But included in that list are some very important terms that are very relevant here, like freedom. Freedom now means, apparently, safety. The rule of law means governments taking control of things for, quote, proper outcomes. And one of those words that have been redefined is violence. Violence can now mean words. Honking has been called violence. And they now are taking that literally. They have said they're proceeding against violence, and what do they have? They have words. They have rhetoric. They have an expression of a political position. And it is that rhetoric, it is that political position that they are afraid of. And that constitutes the emergency. And in a way, you know, it does. It does constitute an emergency for them. Not within the meaning of the Emergencies Act. That does not meet that threshold. But in political terms, you can kind of see how this might be seen by them as an emergency. So I'll leave you with this thought. If this invocation of the Emergencies Act is valid, then governments have the power to declare emergencies and crush any peaceful protest, any dissent that threatens their political fortunes and ideology. And that's not the kind of country we want to live in. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, I'd like to welcome David Amber up to the podium, a criminal lawyer here in Ottawa.
Thank you, Randy and Bruce, for those comments. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start by using a word that's probably already been overused, but that would be the word unprecedented. Of course, we would expect that the first time a statute is used, particularly one of an exceptional nature, it would be unprecedented. But we didn't imagine that it would be unprecedented in this particular way, where it appears to be a gross overreach for what the statute was created for. The way the government has treated what's going on, particularly in Ottawa as an emergency, has unified honest people on both the left and the right in coming together to say that this is not what the act was meant for. And not only has there not been much scrutiny from a lot of the legacy media, but many of those in social media and otherwise are cheering on the Prime Minister and the government in taking this unnecessary step. I remember when many of those same people who are cheering that on were the same people in the media and otherwise who, when Harper wanted to get rid of the long-form census, were up in arms about that. And yet in this particular situation, we have a peaceful protest taking place in our nation's capital, and Prime Minister Trudeau wants to use the force of this exceptional power to shut it down. And many people in the media are saying nothing about it. It used to be that the media's role was to hold the government to account for the benefit of the people. But what we've been seeing in the last few days is many in the legacy media trying to hold people to account for the benefit of the government. And that's just not acceptable. Now, yesterday, here in Ottawa, the police handed out a number of flyers basically saying in no uncertain terms, go home, leave the area. And we know that that's the basis for the invocation of the Emergency Act here. But I wanted to make a few observations about whether or not it requires people to have to leave. Now, I will say that my comments today should not be construed as legal advice. One of the reasons why is that each and every person who may wish to have legal advice has their own unique circumstances and facts that apply to them. But secondly, one of the reasons why I've refrained from giving prospective legal advice in a situation like this is because there are so many unknowns. We're dealing with an act that has no jurisprudence, that has no precedence, and we're dealing with a climate that's highly politicized. And so I may make some observations on what I think the law should be, reading it, and not just what it should be, but my interpretation of how the law will be interpreted. And Justin Trudeau may have the authorities overstep that. So I can't predict what will happen, but I can make a few observations. The first is that although Justin Trudeau, through his rhetoric, and the police through the flyers that they've handed out yesterday, seem to be suggesting that if you don't leave, you'll be in violation of the emergency order, that may not necessarily be the case. I've looked at the regulations that were enacted under the proclamation of the emergency order, and as mentioned earlier, one of them deals with the situation on the ground and one of them deals with the financing. Looking at the first one that deals with the situation on the ground, it lists a number of things which are prohibited. And what it says under section 2 of that regulation is that a person must not participate in a public assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace by, and it lists 3 things. So it's just not any breach of the peace. It needs to be a breach of the peace that leads to the serious disruption of the movement of persons or goods or the serious interference with trade. Number 2, the interference with the functioning of critical infrastructure. And number 3, the support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. And so Justin Trudeau has said that he is not trying to suspend the rights under the Charter, nor could he. The Emergency Act specifically says that the rights under the Charter must be adhered to. And so this wording would seem to me, probably had some lawyers involved in drafting this, to try and allow for the continuing of lawful protest. And the Emergency Act only targets somebody if they are seriously disrupting the movement of persons or goods, or dealing with the infrastructure, or otherwise using violence. Now, I'm not going to address my comments to any of the protests that took place at the border. Many or most of, if not all of those protests are under control and are not what we're talking about here today. What I'm talking about here today is in the city of Ottawa. The number of truckers who have come here and supporters who have come here to Ottawa, many of them are lining the streets parked illegally. Is that a serious disruption of movement of persons? I note that since the very beginning, the truckers have left lanes of traffic open in almost all of the locations where they have been protesting. In fact, where roads have been completely shut down, it's mainly been due to the response by the authorities to shut those roads down using barricades or police vehicles. And so, while I'm not necessarily saying you will be safe if you remain here or leave your vehicle here, we've seen that this government will engage in overreach. But what I'm saying is that if anybody gets charged, myself and Mr. Wolfson, Matt Wolfson from my office, we're going to be defending as many people as we can against any charges brought under the Emergency Act. And aside from, as Bruce mentioned, attacking the basis for the act to have even been invoked, we will certainly look closely if a person has actually engaged in the, quote, serious disruption of movement of persons or the threat or use of serious violence. Because I haven't seen any violence here in Ottawa. I've not seen any interference with the functioning of critical infrastructure. And to the extent that there's been a disruption, it's not been a serious disruption to the movement of persons or goods, but it's been a disruption to Justin Trudeau. And he finds it inconvenient to work in a democracy where people can disrupt his political wishes. And so, again, I cannot predict how the act is going to be enforced, but the mere act of staying to voice your protest and even violating some laws, such as the parking regulations, in my estimation, do not constitute the type of emergency that is referenced in the regulations. I'll be here to answer any questions. I just will say one other thing, since I've been getting so many phone calls about this over the last few days. Many people in the community have donated money in support of the truckers. I don't believe that anyone can say that they did so in bad faith. I think that the truckers were holding positions that were very important, and not just to them, but for all Canadians. And so people who donated to the protest should not feel ashamed of having done so. Now, if there is any connection for anything moving forward to any of the things I listed, a serious disruption of movement or persons or goods, or the serious interference with trade, infrastructure, or violence, if there's any donations that tie to that moving forward, certainly the government does have the power to act and have financial institutions act. But all I would say is to those who have already donated and are worried, until or unless you actually run into an actual problem with an account being frozen or the authorities contacting you, I've seen a lot of people who were borderline in tears, wondering if their house would be taken from them, if they'd be able to feed their kids. I want everyone to know, at least for now, operate under the assumption that things will be fine if you made a small donation, and if you hear from your bank or the authorities regarding it, then contact either myself or, in the case of the bank freezing your assets, a civil litigation lawyer, and we'll see what we can do to make sure that your interests are looked after. I'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Your one comment there, I have to make a comment on. David mentioned that nobody should be ashamed of donating to the Truckers Convoy. Of course, I concur. There's only one party that I think you should be ashamed of if you've donated to, and that's the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
Let me welcome noted Ottawa lawyer Cecil Lyon up to the podium. Thank you.
Randy, you just lost all your credibility by saying that.
Nope.
So it's a function of age. So why am I here? Well, I've been practicing law not quite as long as Randy suggested, not quite 35 years, but for a long time. And my expertise is in dispute resolution. And you've already been schooled by Professor Party and by Mr. Amber about the intricacies of the law. It seems to me that what we have here is an absence of problems in our society. In fact, one could argue that our society is working quite well as it is, and people are doing what they should be doing when they disagree with what the government is doing. What isn't appropriate is what the government is doing. It's been described as an overreach. I would go further than that. I would say an exponential overreach. Let's look. The facts are that this piece of legislation historically, until it morphed into the Emergencies Act, was used in World War I, World War II, and at the October crisis in 1970. So Justin's papa, where he said famously, "Just watch me." Those are the three instances that this piece of legislation has been used. Now it's been changed dramatically to protect people's civil liberties and to allow for more oversight. But to me, this is an egregious example of the government losing its way and not looking at how you should resolve a dispute. My expertise is in dispute resolution. It's about how people can get by conflicts. And you don't bring out, as Mr. Hillier said, a sledgehammer to kill a fly. You engage, you have a talk, you chat. The examples throughout Canada, from Coutts, Alberta, to Emerson, Manitoba, to the Peace Bridge, to the Ambassador Bridge, to the bylaw that the single citizen in Ottawa, or not bylaw, sorry, the injunction the single citizen in Ottawa obtained to curtail the honking for certain hours, have all been complied with. The bridges are open. Canadians are by and large law-abiding citizens. So where you have a government that so overreaches that it brings in the most extraordinary piece of legislation in its arsenal, it has no other weapons in its quiver, no other arrows. This is it. So it's brought out the thermonuclear bomb to deal with what? A peaceful protest? There's no examples. I mean, I've been watching the news. I think most Canadians have. You see hot tubs, people playing hockey. How un-Canadian. Nobody's been, aside from the residents in downtown Ottawa, yes, they have been inconvenienced, but unfortunately, one of the prices you have to pay to live in a free and democratic society is putting up with things that you don't agree with. As I would tell my son, just deal with it. The reality here is that we as a country have a decision to make. Do we respond to this overreach by just rolling over and saying, yes, Justin, you go ahead and do whatever you want? Or do we stand up and say, no, this is wrong, find a better way? There are better ways. It's just that Justin seems incapable of finding those better ways. Maybe it's his lack of experience, maybe it's his lack of education, maybe it's reasons that I can't even imagine. But the fact is that the government failed in its obligations to the citizens of Canada by engaging with them. And I commend the truckers. I don't agree with everything that they say, but I don't have to. I can certainly stand here and defend the right to say it and to protest. And when my government overreacts, to say, government, you're wrong, and you need to back down. Thanks very much.
And now, last but not least, thank you, Cecil, is Sandy. If you'd come on up and share with the audience your thoughts today.
Hi there. My name's Sandy Williams, little town in northern Alberta, Canuso, Alberta. This message was sent to me today from one of our guys, good fellows from our block, that we became pretty tight, everybody hanging out up there. So I'm going to share this with you guys. I hope that we all in here realize this is our stand. This is our chance. We won't get another one. If anyone leaves, don't think that they will stop. If it's not today, tomorrow, next week, or next month, they will come for us in one way or another. Whatever they can threaten to take from us is not worth having it if our country is not free or our children have to live under a dictatorship. Let them come and unlawfully get us. As soon as they let me out, I'm coming to haul my ass back right here, if needed. Godspeed. So that today basically is where a lot of us are feeling, everybody that's out there right now. We went through some issues here the last couple days and lots of warfare, psychological, and but it's hardened everybody out there to realize exactly why we're here. So that's kind of the way everybody's feeling out there right now, fellas that are holding the line. But I just want to share like why we coming across this great country and getting here. And I guess it come pretty clear as soon as we got here what our mission was, and it was to meet people. And it started as a truckers movement, I guess, and what we see here right now is every walk of life, right? From nurses to doctors to scientists to lawyers to people that lost their work. We hear stories all day long, and it's probably the most moving thing. I don't know, it's just people being real people. We don't have all that crap going on with the site or the surface babble. We're meeting real people. We brought our kids, we brought people together, and bouncy castles, as like Randy said, and pancake breakfast last Sunday. And this has become one of the biggest block parties. That's the feel on the street. So to take something like this and make it a, what do you call it, emergency act or whatever, something violent is unbelievable, right? So all I can say is that we came in peace, and we're going to be leaving in peace this go, and that's not ever changed. And their move is theirs, right, to make, and that's where we know where we stand, on the right side of history, and firmly planted. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I want everybody I'm going to stand back for a minute, and I want you to take a picture, because this is the picture that threatens Justin Trudeau. This is the picture of violence that necessitates the War Measures Act in Canada. And then we'll have some questions. Thank you, Sandy.
What's the smile on my way?
Questions, here we have.
Yeah, that's actually for Sandy Williams. Sandy, we were listening to the Prime Minister talk this morning. He was using very extreme language towards the people that are at the Freedom Convoy. Can you just tell us like your response and how you feel about being labeled as you and your family and people in bouncy castles as terrorists?
Well, yeah, honestly, we don't dive into that. I've been taught a long time ago to stay on the positive side of things and you look at what you want to be going towards, not getting sucked into. So one way that I could put it is there's an 11-year-old over at our little village we've created over there, and he walked up and said at 11 years old, I'd become a domestic terrorist. We all had a pretty good laugh about it, right? So that's the face of that. That's where we're at, right?
Right here.
This is for Mr. Party.
Right.
Mr. Party, you wrote an article before for the National Post saying that the charter has basically been trampled on since COVID came to town. What can Canadians expect in terms of the government, the House, actually following protocols to invoke this measure now, since they haven't been following any of the rules anyways?
Right, so If in fact what I've said is correct, that the threshold for invoking the act hasn't been met, that doesn't mean that things will stop unless and until somebody goes to a court to say that very thing. It'll just carry on because, frankly, what I've said is an opinion. And on the other side are going to be other opinions that think, yeah, we have. So we're going to carry on. So the court gets the last word on this. The court will take those words that I cited to you and will apply those words to the facts. And those facts will consist in part of what the government has to offer in terms of what's actually happening. And if all the government has to offer, as I suggested, is words, rhetoric, and not actual serious violence, well then I would like to think that the court will conclude that the threshold has not been met, and therefore everything that has happened pursuant to the statute will be void, invalid. Now, keep in mind that what I've just described has nothing itself to do with the charter. The statute has its own requirements. And the first thing is whether or not those requirements have been met. Now, even if they have been met, then we get to a second question about whether or not the measures put in place are consistent with the charter. That's an additional extra case that has to be argued. And I'm sure that it will be. I would expect that case to be brought to a court to see just that. Does that answer the question? Yes.
Question here.
Yeah, this is Jen Torma for Steel Truths. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ann.
Hello. Yes. This is Dr. Graves, and I am a physician in the heartland of America. And there's several things that I would like to make a comment on first, and that is I would like to commend these brave people who have come forth, and they are standing for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you know it or not, the whole world is looking at you right now, what your decision will be, whether democracy will live or whether democracy will die. And you are at that helm right now before you live democracy. And I want to know what misinformation, there's a misinformation campaign in healthcare, not only in Canada, but we certainly have it here in America. And I want to know what basis that your Trudeau is actually saying to base his scientific facts on in making these mandates. And they need to be questioned. Show us the science. Show us it. I continually am asked, where is the science in mandating a mask when a coronavirus is 0.125 microns and the masks don't actually filter anything less than 0.3? Where is the science on how this is a microvascular disease? I want to know what is that and what is he basing it on? And I thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think, I don't know if there's anybody is willing or able or to actually address some of the stuff that you said. I want to thank you for the kind words. But does anybody want to, I think I can just say there has not been any demonstration of the science that anybody is aware of anywhere in the world to the doctor from the Midwestern states. Anybody have any further comments on it?
Well, I'll say one thing. One general point is that people keep saying, follow the science, follow the science. For the longest time, this has not been an issue of science. This has been an issue of setting priorities. Governments that have been making decisions had to take into consideration a number of things, including the science, but also the economy, the health and well-being, the mental health and well-being of the citizenry, a bunch of different factors, democratic concerns, rights-based concerns. And so when Doug Ford or Justin Trudeau or any premier says follow the science and basically abdicates its role to the decisions of non-elected health officials, it's not an issue about not following the science. It's an issue that our leaders have chosen to abdicate their role in setting priorities.
I have a question for the lawyer there that was just speaking.
Yeah.
I'm an individual, Sean Zimmer from Winnipeg. I have my bank account frozen. I've been bringing funds in to help feed families and keep just rent Airbnbs. So I have no worries. We have many ways to go around that. But the individuals watching who are having bank accounts frozen that are letting that fear in and are worried, what would you suggest? Do you have any contact information of where they should go and who to speak to on such?
I'm just going to try to reiterate the question for everybody that may be watching online.
Absolutely.
So the question is about your account has been frozen?
That's correct. Mine has personally. It's not a concern of myself, but I know others have that are concerned. So
And
what
a response
advice?
from David Amber regarding those people who may face that?
Correct, yeah.
So first I'd say I'm very sorry to hear that your
Oh,
account
don't be. It's okay.
was
It's
frozen. I mean, what I've been fortunate to hear is that most of the people who contact me, it's not fortunate that they're contacting me, they're quite upset about it, but I would say 95% of the people that have contacted me, they have not been frozen and they're more concerned about what may happen.
Right.
So my advice earlier was your concerns are legitimate, but wait until a shoe actually drops before you get worried. In a case like yours, where your account has actually been frozen, I would suggest contacting Civil Litigation Counsel at the earliest opportunity and engaging your bank, because I mean, there could be long-term consequences if your relationship with your bank is terminated. And there might be a way of dealing with this at the civil level that's outside of my area of expertise, though.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, next question over here.
Yes. So my question is for Mr. Party. We keep hearing about the science being spoken to, about the science, as opposed to simply science. It seems like there's how can I say, it's going to one end as opposed to being science in general. You wrote an article on this. Could you please speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, the science is the dogma. Yes, that's what it really means. Science does not work by consensus. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer, but I know enough about it to know that that's not the scientific method. In order for science to progress and to develop, you need disagreement. That's its fuel. So let's go back to the word that arose a moment ago from this question, which was misinformation. Right? Misinformation. Whenever you hear the word misinformation, that's code for censorship. Right? In a free country, you are allowed to say what you think is true, whether it's actually true or not. The test for free speech is not truth. Because if it was, we would put our government into the position of being the one to judge what was true. And that's exactly the opposite of the way our free country works. Okay? So there's an expectation that has developed that's very dangerous. And the expectation is that the government will make sure that what I hear on the news is correct. And that's actually the opposite of the way it should be. I mean, I would suggest this. I would suggest that when you watch the news or are online reading something, the starting position, the default position, is you should assume that what you're seeing or reading or hearing is false. Because that's the sign of a free country. And then you can work it out for yourself. That's the job of a free citizen. If you're expecting your information to be filtered so there's nothing there but the truth, then you're probably going to get the reverse. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go over here.
Myself. This is for you, Randy Hillier. We got to the Parliament Hill today, and there is new fencing that has been erected. I asked a couple of police officers if they knew anything about it. They said they arrived at work today, and they did not know that the fencing would be up, and that the police had not put the fencing up. Any word on why there is new fencing around Parliament and who might have done that?
Well, I don't have any facts or evidence, any factual comments on who has put it up or when or why. But I would say, I think the response that I would provide is Trudeau has invoked or declared the state of emergency, but he has not yet gained parliamentary approval or acceptance of his declaration. And I would say to everybody, for Justin Trudeau to enact any measure under the Emergencies Act prior to gaining full parliamentary approval through a vote, which is expected on Monday night, is an abuse of the process as well as the abuse of the declaration of emergency. There is nothing imminent that indicates that they need to execute any portion of the Emergency Act before Parliament either provides its concurrence or its rejection, and I certainly hope they reject that measure. I have a question here.
Yeah, Greg Wycliffe. So we live in a democratic country, right? And a democratic country has debates. For those keeping track, in the last federal election, there was no debate on mandates or passports. Two-part question, is debate dead in this country? And more importantly, how is the trucker convoy supposed to negotiate with the government when they clearly do not want to listen to us?
So the question is debate dead? And how is the trucker convoy to negotiate when they clearly don't want to listen to you? Is there a particular person that you want that response from?
I would love to hear comment from any Bruce, any lawyer who would like to chime in with any thoughts, really.
Well, the willingness to debate certainly is on the downward trend. Yes, it's. See, I think what is happening over time is you're getting an ideology that thinks it owns the truth, and when you own the truth, you don't want to debate, because to admit that you're going to debate means that there might be another version of the truth. It's a willingness to engage in another person's perspective. So if you're monolithic about what is true and good, then debate doesn't fit very well in that. I'm not sure that I can go much further than that without going down a rabbit hole. Anybody else want?
I'll just.
We'll do the dance.
We're very friendly. It's a really good question. I, as just a regular citizen, ask that of myself frequently. People don't debate anymore. People don't engage anymore. People just talk at each other. And when you have a federal government that, as Professor Carty said, owns the truth, there's no incentive. You can't bring people to the table who have an unshakable belief in what they're doing. And you know, of course, there are lots of theories about why it is they're doing it, to maintain, you know, elites and that sort of thing. But in a dispute where people have differences, unless you can bring them together and find some commonality, I mean, a good starting point would be Canadians who like to talk to each other, then you're not going to get anywhere. I'm not very good at telling jokes, but my favorite Canadian joke is this. How do you get 20 Canadians out of a swimming pool? Just ask. Right? We are a compliant lot by and large. And if you look at the history, I mean, we have, unfortunately, the experience in the United States on January 6th of last year. That's not Canada. We don't do that. And I'll just bring back to the comment about the science. There is no one right answer. You can go to Denmark, you can go to Sweden, you can go to the United Kingdom, you can now go to Saskatchewan and get differing views about how to deal with this. You have a prime minister who's doubled down on how he wants to handle it without really engaging with the citizens, and unfortunately that's going to lead to an intractable dispute because no one's going to talk.
Thank you, Cecil. We're going to have Matthew just respond quickly to that as well. Hold the microphone up close so everybody can hear.
Yes, thank you, Randy. As mentioned, my name is Matthew Wilson, and I'm an associate of David Amber. I haven't had a speech that I've prepared today, but I'd just like to supplement some comments that have been made by everyone here. And no, debate is not dead. The fact that we're all here and the fact that we're speaking about this is testament to the breath of life that we've given it. It continues, but it is under threat, and it is under threat, we know, because we have a head of government who has shown a lack of commitment to it. As has been pointed out, he will not sit down with people to even understand what their objectives are when they have the temerity to show up at the nation's capital and protest the direction this country has been going. I've had an opportunity to read the regulation recently made under the Emergencies Act, and as Mr. Amber has discussed, there is a prohibition on public assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace. It is the first provision in this regulation after the definition section. I would argue it is the priority and the thrust of this regulation. And that prohibition on participation and attendance at this assembly is quite broad, quite vague. It gives the government a very large reach and a wide net to cast. It does not circumscribe where people are expected, where people are allowed to be and where they are not allowed to be. That, in and of itself, is a deterrent to people who wish to come to this protest. The last provision sets out criminal penalties for taking part in that sort of assembly. And that will have a chilling effect, and I think that speaks to the threat that currently exists on debate in this country, particularly with respect to this pandemic and the science behind it.
Thank you. This gentleman over in the corner there, you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, the gentleman spoke of the Emergency Act having to be dealt with in the courts. Can you tell us what the steps are to get from here to there, and has that been undertaken, or what happens for that?
Here we go.
Whether and how far along somebody is with that enterprise, I couldn't tell you, because they would be acting probably on their own. It's not any more complicated than any other kind of challenge to government authority. You need to find a plaintiff or an applicant, you need to find a lawyer, you need to file some papers, and away you go. Now, the difficulty is that to actually get to a final hearing takes some time, and probably too long. So what probably will have to happen in the meantime, you shall have to apply for an injunction. And the threshold for an injunction is quite high. It'll be higher than for the case itself. And that's why there have been several applications for injunctions made through the COVID period to challenge COVID rules, which generally speaking have not been successful because of that higher bar. But that's the kind of thing that would need to happen.
So if it doesn't happen, because that sounds pretty difficult.
No, not impossible though. I
Right.
mean, given the circumstances, I would like to think that it's got a pretty good chance.
We would all like to
Yeah,
hope.
yeah.
But if it doesn't, then where does it go? Like, it just, there's no other way to challenge what has happened?
Well, if you apply for the injunction is turned down, that doesn't mean you can't proceed to the hearing of the actual case. Just in the meantime, things would carry on as they are.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a few guests that have to leave soon, so I'm going to take two more questions with one here.
Yes, thank you so much. So this question would be for a lawyer, and it's quite a common question out there. My daughters are currently in Australia, and with the mandates now with having to be vaccinated, can Canadian citizens return to Canada legally without being vaccinated? And just another thing, because they are mandating it in Australia as well, that in order for them to board a plane, that they have to be vaccinated. So can I just get your thoughts on that for Canadians? And
So the question is about vaccinations for Canadian citizens returning
Exactly,
to
yeah.
Canada. I can answer that. There is no requirement to be vaccinated to return to Canada. Canadian cannot prevent you from returning. However, what the other countries, the originating countries' requirements are, does anybody want to speak to that specific? I'm not sure what the Australian rules are, and anyway, did you? No, okay. Jim, final question, and then we'll.
So my question is to Sandy. Sandy, you've come here as a family man. You've come here with a bunch of strangers. Could you please explain to the audience what has been created and what you're creating in your truck zone, your truck block? What are you guys creating over there? Just explain everything that you told me about big growth, the whole thing. Just explain. I think people need to really hear what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah. yeah, we spoke about it here last night, right? And you stopped by, and so yeah, basically what's getting created is a sense of community like you wouldn't believe. The type of community that we had when we were growing up. More grassroots. People had time to talk. They weren't caught up with everything. And it's completely organic. People are all here in the right reasons. Like I said earlier, that all the people that are showing up to talk on the street, they're just unbelievable. And it starts in the morning and ends late at night. And everybody's coming by and they're sharing stories, right from federal workers to you name it. Every single walk of life that's been affected by this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, but
Your pig roast.
Oh, pig roast! Yeah, we did a pig roast last night. Yeah, we're in a state of emergency. We just won't burn the pig. But no, yeah, sense of community, unbelievable. These guys that we've met, everybody that's part of this whole movement will be friends for the rest of our lives. Like, it's just anchored everybody together. But we got asked the question the other day. One of the girls stopped by, a young gal from close to here. She said, "When are you guys gonna go home?" And not many guys would really give it much thought, because we don't really have, that's out of our hands. But something I thought about this morning. I woke up, we got lots of chores to get done at home. We need a home that we'd like to be back at, right? And the message has been very clear since we rolled in here, that we just want our freedoms back. And the sooner we can get all that answered, Ottawa, we're gone more gladly. This is a beautiful city, but we got beautiful communities that we all come from, and we're building it. We got beautiful communities here, be everlasting. But yeah, just we just want to have a discussion at the table. It's been so clear from the beginning, and our freedom's back, and we can get it all back. But yeah,
Thank you for your example and strength.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So listen, thank you everybody for being here today. I want to, many of us will be here to answer further questions. But to sign off, we'll say, come to Ottawa for freedom this weekend. I'll be here, Sandy will be here, and I will say, there's great fellowship in freedom will be here in Ottawa. Come down and join, whether it's a pig roast or a pancake breakfast or whatever else, or maybe I understand, I hear that there may be some pillow talk in Ottawa this weekend as well.
30,000.
And regardless, Justin Trudeau, Jim Watson, the new chief of police, you can all be certain we will be standing with the truckers firmly with our feet planted here and all along, and wherever they go, we'll be going with them. Thank you very much.
Live from Ottawa, press conference. Over and out, everyone. God bless. Hold the line.
So I do have an answer for you.